This is Jinx. Pretty evil, right? Well, what if I told you she's actually not the bad person everyone sees her as? Now, before you call me insane, let's rewind for a moment. Before the chaos, before the name Jinx, there was just Powder, a scared, wide-eyed girl trying to navigate the harsh realities of the world around her. Picture this, she's growing up in Zaun, a city where survival isn't guaranteed, and danger is always lurking just around the corner. And then, tragedy strikes. Her parents gone, killed during the brutal Piltover Zaun conflict. In an instant, her entire sense of safety is ripped away. She's left clinging to her older sister Vi and a scrappy group of misfits she calls family. But here's where heartbreak truly begins. Powder, desperate to prove her worth, tries to help during a critical moment. Instead, her invention, a bomb she thought would save her family, ends in catastrophe. An explosion, devastating and final. And just like that, her found family is gone. Gone because of her. This wasn't the calculated act of a villain. This was the tragic, gut-wrenching mistake of a child who only wanted to help. Imagine being Powder in that moment. The crushing realization that your best effort to save the people you love has backfired in possibly the worst way. That kind of guilt, that kind of self-blame is not something you just carry. It literally shapes you. It warps how you see the world and how you see yourself. Now, this moment, this devastating explosion, became the foundation for everything that followed. But that's just the start. To really understand her story, we need to dig even deeper. What happens when you lose everything and then find yourself completely alone? After that fateful explosion, Jinx was left completely alone. The world she knew had crumbled, and the one person she trusted above all else, Vi, was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. Imagine that for a moment. That one constant in your life disappears without a trace. For Jinx, this wasn't just abandonment. It was like the last piece of her fragile foundation had been ripped away, left to fend for herself in a brutal and unforgiving world. Jinx spiraled. Self-doubt began to consume her. Was I the problem? Did I drive her away? And that doubt quickly turned into anger and confusion. She was desperate for answers, but all she got was silence. But that wasn't the worst of it. Her mind began to turn on her. The explosion, the betrayal, the loneliness. It all created this storm of guilt and grief. One that really never left her. She began hearing the voices of her past, her memories twisting into haunting hallucinations. It's like her trauma created an endless loop, replaying her worst mistakes over and over again. And these hallucinations, they're not just background noise. They taunt her, mock her. They remind her of every failure, every moment she thinks she's let someone down. How could anyone think clearly under that kind of weight? So when Jinx lashes out, when her actions seem reckless or even cruel, it's not because she wants to hurt anyone. It's because she's desperately trying to shield herself. She's building walls, pushing people away, doing whatever it takes to protect what little is left of her heart. It's heartbreaking, really. Her world is chaos because she's fighting the chaos inside of her. And when you look at it that way, it's hard not to see her as the victim of her circumstances rather than a villain. But there's more to her story, because while her struggles are undeniably tragic, they also lead us to the question, are her actions really as evil as they seem? Now, let's talk about Jinx's actions. On the surface, it's easy to label them as pure chaos, right? Explosions, destruction, unpredictable behavior, it all screams villain. But if you dig deeper, you'll see there's something more to her story. Take a step back and ask yourself, why does she do what she does? Her motives aren't rooted in evil, they're rooted in fear and desperation. Think about this. Everything she's ever cared about has either been ripped away from her or twisted beyond recognition. She's terrified of losing what little she has left. So when Jinx creates destruction, it's not random. It's her way of holding on to memories, to relationships, to her own fractured sense of reality. One of the most powerful examples of this is in the dinner scene. Picture it. Jinx sets the table, bringing together Vi, Silco, and even Caitlyn. Not to assert dominance, but to find clarity. She's not playing the villain here, she's desperately trying to figure out who she can trust. But her emotions are so overwhelming, so tangled, that chaos becomes the only language she knows how to speak. Her behavior in that moment, it's heartbreaking. The people she loves are at odds, and she's caught in the middle, drowning in betrayal betrayal and insecurity. Her actions seem erratic, sure, but they're not coming from a place of malice, they're coming from a place of pain. And isn't that what makes her so compelling? Jinx isn't trying to destroy the world, she's trying to survive in it, to piece together a life that makes sense when nothing around her does. Her explosions, her attacks, they're not about harming others, they're about protecting herself from being hurt again. So is she a villain, or is she someone just trying to navigate a broken world the only way she knows how? As we look closer, that line becomes blurrier and blurrier. It's so tempting, isn't it, to point to Jinx and say that's the villain. After all, she leaves a trail of destruction wherever she goes. Buildings crumble, lives are lost, and chaos seems to follow her like a shadow. But stop for a second and ask yourself, are her actions really so different from everyone else fighting to survive in a world like Zaun? Think about it. The Piltover Enforcers, the Chem Barons, and even Vi, they all make choices that lead to violence and destruction. But because they have a badge, a mission, or a justifiable cause, we're quick to rationalize their actions. Jinx, though, she's labeled as reckless, dangerous, evil. But what if we flip that perspective? What if her so-called chaos is simply her way of coping with a broken system? A system that failed her at every turn. Her explosions, they're not random. They're cries for control in a life that's been anything but stable. Her attacks, they're desperate attempts to protect herself from being hurt again. Sure, her methods are extreme, but they're not born out of malice. They're rooted in fear, pain, and a desire to matter in a world that constantly dismisses her. And here's the kicker. If you really take a step back and see the world through her eyes, the line between hero and villain doesn't just blur, it practically disappears. What's left is a young woman fighting to survive in the only way she knows how. And that's not evil, that's human. Now that we've seen how Jinx's chaos isn't as black and white as it seemed, let's dive deeper into the emotional core of her story. Because the real tragedy isn't the destruction she causes, it's in what she lost along the way. Jinx's story isn't one of pure evil, it's the story of a child shaped by a series of events so devastating, so relentless, that they broke her in ways the world refused to mend. It's about trauma that festered in isolation, a soul who didn't choose destruction, but was led there by a series of betrayals and heartbreaks. From the loss of her parents to the shattering guilt of her accident, Jinx has been fighting battles no one truly sees. But here's the thing, when you look closely, her chaos isn't random, it's not senseless, it's a desperate cry for understanding, for connection, for someone to prove to her that she's not alone. Think of every time she lashes out. Like I've said, it's not because she enjoys it, it's because it's all she knows how to do when the world feels like it's slipping away from her again. And maybe that's the most tragic part of all. Her story didn't have to go this way. If someone, anyone, had stepped in to truly understand her, to give her the space and support to heal, who knows what she would have become. Maybe instead of Jinx, we'd be talking about Powder, the brilliant, fearless girl who only wanted to belong. Maybe the real tragedy of Jinx isn't the destruction she causes, it's that no one ever gave her the chance to heal. And that, I think, is something worth thinking about. Who else in this world, in our world, is being left behind in the same way? So what's your take? Do you see Jinx as a misunderstood soul shaped by her pain? Or something else entirely? Let's start a conversation. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on her journey. And hey, if you enjoyed unpacking Jinx's story, make sure to like this video. It really helps the channel grow. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you won't miss out on our next deep dive into complex, fascinating characters just like Jinx. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay curious.